Hello, everyone. I wanted to catch you guys up on the tyranny that's been happening in Canada as it's gone kind of silent over there. What happened with the convoy? What's Justin Trudeau up to now? Well, I have a Canadian on the line who's going to come on with me. The latest is that there is a convoy going through Canada. This time it is a bikers convoy. So before we get into it, shout out to the sponsor of my coverage, which is the Fighter Fair flashlight. Stop what you're doing and check this out. Over 10 million Ukrainians have already fled their cities since the Russian invasion, but many are staying back to defend their towns. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens have been issued guns in an effort to hold back Russian advances with nothing more than an ID required to fight. This highlights how vulnerable people are to evil when they don't have weapons to defend themselves. This is why I highly recommend the Fighter Flare flashlight for self-defense. The Fighter Flare flashlight is a tactical, multi-tool self-defense flashlight. It is designed to blind attackers from a distance with a powerful 800 lumens. But get this, there's a reason the Fighter Flare flashlight is highly recommended by military and law enforcement. It's a versatile, look at that. It's a versatile tool that breaks windows in emergencies, alerts for help with a built-in siren, and it charges devices with a built-in power bank. It's also got this glass breaker. Imagine how much better protected you will be with it. Compass at the bottom. We actually used this down on the border when I was covering the immigration issue. In fact, I was riding with the militia. Take a look. Oh, you know what you guys need? Fighter Flare flashlight. All right.
There you go.
See how much brighter that was. So if you've been looking to go above and beyond in your self-defense, you'll love the Fighter Flare flashlight. Get the Fighter Flare flashlight for up to 15% off with the promo code IH15 down below for the next 24 hours. Go to fighterflareflashlight.com, link down below, promo code IH15. With that being said, let's bring up Dr. Sam Dubé joining us from Ottawa. You're in Ottawa right now, right?
I am in the Washington, D.C. of Canada, the capital of Ottawa.
Awesome. Okay, so there is now a bikers convoy going through Canada, through Ottawa, right? This weekend. Tell me about it.
That's right. So there is a group of bikers, and they're called Rolling Thunder, and they're stopping on the outskirts of Ottawa at different towns, making their way to Ottawa. The idea is that it's a group of bikers who are coming to Ottawa, going to the National War Memorial, that's very close to Parliament Hill, to reconsecrate the National War Memorial. As part of the fallout of the Freedom Convoy, the truckers convoy that happened here in Ottawa very recently, the government basically installed a fence around the National War Memorial. I believe it's 7 feet, and isolating the people from their war memorial, in particular, isolating the veterans from their National War Memorial. So the veterans took this as an affront, as something dishonorable, and they plan to come down and reconsecrate the National War Memorial. They're not calling it a protest. They're not calling it, they're not associated officially with the trucker convoy. They're there to bring back honor to this icon, to this national symbol of the contribution of veterans, Canadian veterans.
So I have this headline from the Globe and Mail.com. Politics brief: Trudeau confident police can handle display of hate symbols at upcoming biker protest in Ottawa. They have a quote from him. Quote, "We trust the police to enforce the laws as necessary when it comes to this weekend. When it comes to any given day," Mr. Trudeau said during a news conference in Montreal on Friday. Symbols of hate. What's your take on that? Are these guys a hateful group?
So they're hearkening back to the trucker convoy, where photos circulated. One, some video of an individual with a Confederate flag who was basically shooed away. This was an isolated instance where he was not wanted. He was completely bundled up, and the evidence appears to indicate he was a plant. The second was some photos of what appeared to be a Nazi flag on the side of the Chateau Laurier, brandished by a middle-aged Caucasian man. And again, there's evidence that there was a setup involved here. Didn't last long. people didn't even notice he was there until he'd been there for some photos had been taken. There looks to be at least one photographer of dubious origin taking photos as well. It's been said in the House of Commons, it's been said during the parliamentary sessions that the truckers were racist, and it was ridiculous. Anyone who'd actually gone down there and participated or witnessed the convoy, as did probably over 100,000 Canadians, that they were not a racist group. They were not a violent group. I have friends in the police force who told me, they said this was not a normal protest. These protesters could not be intimidated. They could not be provoked in any way for violence. They could not be provoked to incite violence at all. And so it's very interesting because the media ran with this, and it's really reprehensible how the media tried to portray the truckers as a literally a Nazi group. There were Sikh truckers there. There were African Canadian truckers there. There are many Eastern European truckers there. There are so many female truckers at the wheel of their trucks. Okay, I saw this personally.
Yeah, it was either BBC or The Guardian who made note that the only actual Nazi sign that they saw was one that said Trudeau is a Nazi.
Right.
So that was the actual message, and then it gets twisted to say that the truckers are Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. And all you needed to do was go there and experience what was going on in the proximity of Parliament Hill.
So what's the latest with these truckers? I mean, we know some of them got locked up. Some of them got their bank accounts stripped of their own money.
Yeah, absolutely. The government was claiming over 270 bank accounts were frozen without due process. And
did they ever get their money back, or what's the latest?
So many of those accounts remained frozen for some time until FinTrack, I believe it was FinTrack was the organization, had investigated them. And I know in particular of a woman in Toronto who had nothing to do with the convoy, who sold her house, received a large deposit in her bank account after the sale of the house, and had her account frozen. And this was a property she'd lived in for about a quarter of a century. And it was a substantial amount of money. And she had to go and negotiate getting her money. And because it looks suspicious, right? So we're hearing things like this. I don't know if your American viewers can even wrap their brains around this one, because this is just, it's insidious. And so they just went ahead and did this. And many of the national banking institutions they were complicit in this. They just went along with this. And there was a huge amount of government overreach. So there's indications there were definitely people who did not associate with the convoy, not just people who donated via GoFundMe or GiveSendGo. We know that there was a hack, someone who was hired by the government in order to dox the names of the people and their locations actually online if they had contributed. And I think you already had heard about this. And GiveSendGo was put under fire as well as the second donation platform. The first one was literally, they froze almost $10 million and said that they were going to repurpose it. And then they changed their mind later and said that we're going to refund all the donations because of the outrage, the outcry online. It was just unbelievable. If you looked online at even.
Yeah, that was, I think that'd be illegal to repurpose it. I think that'd be considered theft.
So the leaders of the convoy were arrested. I think there were 3 of them. One of them was only recently released, and that being Tamara Lich. And she's a mother. She identifies as Métis, which is an old founding ethnicity here, a mixture of European and First Nations, and have a distinct culture, of which I'm very familiar. And she was released after being in prison for a month. Now, contrast that, Ivory, with a gentleman known to have very strong, shall we say, associations to the left, who mowed down 4 protesters in Winnipeg, and his last name, I believe it was Zangarak. Anyway, the media downplayed this. One of the reasons, I believe, was because I think he identified as First Nations. He was First Nations, but he had this this background of hating people who didn't take the needle. And now what's important here is that he was released on bail after a shorter period of imprisonment than Tamara Lich, after mowing down in an SUV 4 protesters associated with the convoy.
And what's she accused of doing? What are
What was
her
he? Oh no, Tamara Litch was one of the leaders of the Freedom Convoy. But
so she's just accused of creating a GoFundMe.
Yeah, it was the charge was something like inciting mischief. The charge, I'd actually never heard the
Oh
charge
my
before.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's insane.
And meanwhile, this guy was up for actually injuring one of the 4 quite badly and attempting to run them all over. There's video footage of this, right?
That's pretty nutty. So back to the bikers convoy. So it's supposed to culminate in this big bikers church service, and now I'm seeing these signs, church service Sunday with the bikers, but now police are blocking any parking around the church, huh?
That's right. So that's a very recent development. So I need to say to especially your American viewers here that the leaders of the biker convoy, the Rolling Thunder, had been negotiating with the Ottawa police for weeks in good faith, what they believed to be good faith. And this was in order to minimize any kind of traffic disruptions or disruptions to services, to plan a route, because they had never intended to occupy, they never intended to stay in Ottawa. It was about reconsecrating the National War Memorial. It was about convening at the Biker Church in Vanier, which is in Ottawa. And it was about bringing back honor to a national symbol, and a symbol of the contribution of veterans, Canadian veterans, to to freedom, actually, to freedom. And so what happened, and I believe it was just yesterday, the day before, is that the city invoked a special event, no parking, in a 2-block radius of this biker church. And so it looks as if they're trying to prevent people from congregating at this church, which you could interpret as discrimination against a religious affiliation. So the people are really up in arms, because this is actually going to disrupt parking in the area for the residents. This is a residential area, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Canadians have it a lot tougher than Americans. I mean, Americans are complaining about masks on planes, and thank God that was just rescinded. But you guys, if you haven't had the needle, you can't even fly, right?
That's right. So there's about 6 million Canadians who are barred from flying, in theory, barred from getting on a boat or a train unless you have your needle pass, right? The proof that you got injected with the experimental gene therapy injections. And so it's about 6 million people. And so there doesn't look to be any backing down from that mandate. There is a lawsuit. There were actually 3 major lawsuits brought against the federal government to combat these transportation mandates, these travel mandates. One of them was brought by none other than the Honorable Brian Peckford, who was the former premier of one of our provinces of Newfoundland. So he's like one of our founding fathers, because he's the last surviving architect who contributed to the formation of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So this is our document that makes Canada what we are, part of what makes what we are, in terms of our rights and our freedoms. And so this gentleman, I believe he's 81. Brian, I'm sorry if you're 80, I apologize, but and he is as sharp as a whip, and he sued the federal government for the travel mandates to try, and because they're unconstitutional, they go against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's very clear sections in there, one in particular which details the right of Canadians to travel freely. Okay, and none of this was actually considered at all with these travel mandates. And so there was the video of Jagmeet Singh from just prior to our federal election in September of 2021, where he actually said they're going to institute federal mandates for the vaccines for for the needle for frontline workers, and that there will be consequences for those who are unable, and then he stopped at unable and changed to unwilling to take the needle.
I have this soundbite here. This is in addition to Justin Trudeau. You guys have this lovely political leader, Jagmeet Singh.
We know that the vast majority of Canadians want to do their part to keep people safe and want to get vaccinated. And we also know that the vast majority of Canadians believe in having some way to prove that vaccination having a passport. And we know that people on the front line that are providing care or providing services directly to Canadians can pose a higher risk and should be vaccinated. So we would work with unions and work with the workers on the ground to make sure we establish a way to move forward. But we absolutely believe that there needs to be mandatory vaccines, and there would be consequences for those who are not able to or not willing to do that. And we could look at what those consequences are. But
okay. So I guess that was a few months ago that he said that. So what sort of consequences have there been for people who refuse to get the needle?
Well, many people were fired. Many were put on unpaid leave. Many of the people who fired left Canada. Many have not been since employed.
Wait, they left Canada. How did they get out? Because to get on a plane, you have
prior to the good. That's a good point. It was prior to the travel mandate,
wow.
the transportation mandate for the vaccines there, Ivory, and you know, people were told that this might happen, and so they left, and that again is one of the other consequences that he's referring to. So this came true. This came true. Now, those three lawsuits over the travel mandates have been combined, and I haven't heard about any progress. In fact, I tried to get an update today on how far these suits have progressed, and I've got nothing. And last time I looked at the timeline, there wasn't anything of consequence really happening until September, and now being at the end of April, okay, 2022. So we got a long way to go. So unless something happens quickly, there's going to be millions of people that are effectively trapped in Canada.
It was interesting how Jagmeet Singh, by the way, what's his title there? What
Good question.
Government role?
So Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the NDP party. So we've kind of got a 3, maybe 4 party system up here, whereas you have this polarity with 2 party, you know, the red and the blue. So our government right now is made up of the Liberal Party. It's a minority government. They have 160 of the 338 seats. Okay, so they have a minority government. The Bloc Québécois, which is another small party, and that was trying for separation, the separation of Quebec. It comes cyclically with them. I believe they have 32 seats. The Conservative Party of Canada is the official opposition, and they're supposed to espouse conservative values, Ivory, okay? They didn't do much over the last 2 years, and their previous leader basically assumed the same position as the leader of the Liberals, who was Prime Minister Trudeau. So a lot of people have been very disappointed in this official opposition. So we have this third party, the NDP. I believe they have 25 seats. So what happened very recently was that the NDP formed a non-coalition coalition, or an alliance, with the Liberal minority government, giving them, I believe it would be 185 seats total. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that one. So effectively, they have a majority government. So they can get the bills passed that they want. And I have to tell your American viewers, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble.
So that means that the Conservatives don't have a chance.
Pretty much. So the leadership for the Conservative Party is up for grabs. We have an interim leader there. I believe it's still Candice Bergen. Yeah, that really is her name, Candice Bergen. They are now, I think, making moves. And so there are several individuals there who are making their bid for the Conservative Party leadership. And, you know, one of them in particular is advertising that he wants to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, and that's Pierre Poilievre. But many Canadians are wondering, where were the Conservatives during the pandemic? Why did they not oppose the Liberal minority government more? Because there was very clear overreach by this Liberal minority government. They didn't have the power to do what they were doing. So, for example, the Emergency Act that was declared to fight off the truckers, the conditions upon which that would be declared were never met. That was supposed to be the sovereignty of Canada was threatened. So
I have this Al Jazeera article, Canada to probe use of emergencies measures to end trucker protest. Emergencies Act requires government to set up inquiry into circumstances leading to its use, actions taken during emergency. So I guess they didn't do that?
So by law, they have to investigate the conditions that led to the Emergency Act being declared. In other words, was it justified to invoke the Emergency Act? The problem is the parliamentary committee that investigates get appointed by guess who? Basically the government, right? The government that called the act into to engage the act. So what the people are calling for now is an independent review. Okay, it's the same thing in the U.S. where you've got the FDA and the CDC endorsing the needle, and they're not independent because they own needle patents. They are financially tied to the marketing and distribution of the needle, and so they can't be independent. And so people have been calling for independent review and assessment of these circumstances now for since prior to the needles being invoked, right? The appearance of the needles. So we have a similar situation here. The analogy runs pretty deep, that the very people that should be being investigated are creating the committees to do the investigations.
Ugh,
right? Does that make sense?
so corrupt.
The conflict of interest is, and that's legal. Like, that's legal, right? So like, it just doesn't make any sense. I tell you, Ivory, there are things that happen in government and in industry that would never happen at your kid's hockey game. Okay. You would not want a parent of the opposing team members as the referee, right? And this is effectively what's you would throw a big stink. It's like, that's not fair. And there's a big conflict of interest. There are conflicts of interest that abound in government and in industry. And when you combine government and industry, you get this corporatism. You get something like the World Economic Forum, right? Which is basically looking for advantages for their stakeholders. So this is the union of government and industry. And quote me if I'm wrong, this is fascism, right? And so what we have now is we effectively have a minority government that is behaving in the ways of a fascist regime, of a totalitarian regime, of a dictatorship, because the overreach is just unreal right now with what's happening with the liberal minority government. And now they have this alliance with, ironically, what's considered the Socialist Party of Canada. They should have been taking the side of the truckers. They should be, supporting the working man, and they did the exact opposite.
Wow. Oh, I was going to make note that Jagmeet Singh, the way that he spoke there was interesting, saying how, most of these workers are so caring about other people's safety, and that's why they're getting the needle. But I mean, here in the U.S., CDC Director Rochelle Walensky has been saying for months that, admitting that these needles don't prevent the transmission of the illness
or infection.
But what they do is, she says, they do alleviate your symptoms a little bit.
Yeah, well, if they look at the data, it actually doesn't lower the number of hospitalizations. And so what's happening here in Canada is we've got a very low number of hospitalizations now compared to earlier on in the pandemic. And so they're starting to test the wastewater. They're testing.
We've been doing that in America.
Mm-hmm.
We love looking at wastewater.
There is a large scientific outcry against testing the wastewater in order to estimate cases. I mean, we know that using the PCR test was not a way to count cases. It wasn't a way. You can't use the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction test or technique in order to determine a case. And the inventor of that technique, Dr. Kerry Mullis, said so numerous times. He also he despised Dr. Anthony Fauci and challenged him to open debate multiple times. And unfortunately, he died in August of 2019. So that was right before the pandemic. You can think about that one if you want. So anyway, that was retracted. The PCR test was retracted in December of 2021 in a class one, I guess class one retraction, based on the sequencing work of Dr. Dolores Cahill of Ireland, who is not only a scientist, but trained in law. And she showed that the PCR test you just couldn't use it for this purpose. And we all knew that from the beginning, Ivory, okay? And so now, again, the PCR test was used to potentially to inflate numbers, right? And then you had the CDC admit, I believe it was August the 6th of, was it 2021? And they said it was in August, yeah, and they said that only 6% of the people who died from COVID actually died from COVID. The others died with COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So they're kind of trying to backtrack, and it goes in line with Rachel Walensky saying that she heard about the efficacy of the injections, the needles, on CNN. It was 95% effective. And of course, that number is just, it represents the relative risk reduction, the RRR, which is incredibly misleading.
Wow. That's horrible. It's a mess up there. I'm glad America is a little bit better than Canada. But, you know, we got your back. We Americans love our friends to the north. And keep us updated on all the chaos there.
You know I will, Ivory. Listen, I wish we had a Second Amendment.
Yeah.
And, we need...
So are Canadians not allowed to have guns?
Well, I mean... No, they are. You know, the process is a bit more laborious, from what I understand, and you know, for hunting, definitely we have a very old tradition of hunting, and so depending on where you are geographically, but we don't have a Second Amendment. And I just want to finish my thought about what can the public do. We need the silent majority to speak out. We really do. You can no longer say, hey, yeah, no, this will be handled. Oh, yeah, that sounds really bad. I'm sorry. You know, as Canadians always apologize for things they never do. And right. Like, and it's like, that doesn't hold any water. Like, you have to stand up and say, okay, this is really wrong. You know, oh, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. You know, it's like, no, this is really wrong. This is really, really wrong. What's happening up here? We literally have bills waiting in the wings for reading. Okay, so this is the process where they eventually get approved, and we have bills that are potentially going to end free speech here in Canada and on the internet. So a show like yours, government doesn't like it, boom, it's gone. Okay, potentially that's what can happen. We have bills, we have laws waiting there for approval to be read through, and the public doesn't know exactly what's going on because they really make a concerted effort to hide this. I'm telling you, they do. And then they say, well, you should have looked at the site. You should have done this. A lot of this stuff is done in plain sight, Ivory. And what has to happen is the general public needs to take more responsibility and start digging and start looking and researching and asking questions. And it's a very positive thing when a longtime neighbor of my parents comes up to me and says, so I hear the needle isn't the solution anymore. And he was completely pro needle. I never talked to him because I'd go over to help my parents out with something. And, you know, and I avoided speaking with him because it would start to polarize. He was definitely super. And one of his best friends is a family doctor. And when I mentioned to him that there were viable, effective treatments, and he said, oh, well, my friend's a family doctor. He said, that's all garbage and that doesn't work. And I'm like, really? And where's he getting his information from? And I just knew right away, like, because physicians usually don't have the time to do the research. So what they do is they look at summaries, they look at something that claims to be evidence-based, and then they take that for granted. They accept that as truth because it's their college or it's their governing body or it's public health that are saying this. And I think what people have to realize is there's huge conflicts of interest, Ivory, between government, industry, you know, public health, and things going on, some really unholy alliances where money and influence are the primary motivators. And so once you understand that, and you understand that these are humans making decisions, they're no better than you or me. They may have training in other fields, but some of them actually don't. And when you see that some of the decisions being made are really bureaucratic or political decisions being made by individuals who are really grossly unqualified to make these kind of decisions, then you understand when you see Prime Minister Trudeau say, we're always following the science. Oh, really? Okay, quote the science then. In the US, you've got Steve Kirsch, who's offered $1 million to any expert that can come out and support the idea that the needles are safe and effective, and the narrative that's being propagated by public health and the Biden administration. Nobody's taken it. Nobody's taken the 1 million. We've had several attempts up here to debate the science with government and public health authorities. No one's taking it. No one's taking it. Instead, ad hominem attacks, personal attacks, censorship, attempts to discredit, attempts to ban, stifle opinion, and then you get bills like this waiting in the wings to effectively end free speech.
Wow.
Even in your own country right now, the DHS just came out with a new initiative, the Ministry of Truth, right? And and Tucker Carlson, he was sounding the alarm on this. And how can this happen? How can this happen? That you've got literally a new government division to police what they get to call misinformation, which by definition can be anything they decree, right?
Right. That's crazy. Anyway, yeah, it's scary times.
I can just ramble on and on, right? So.
Free speech preserves free people. So I hope that we can keep that. Scary times. Thank you so much, Sam Dubé, for filling us in on what is going on in Canada. And hopefully this bikers convoy will end successfully, peacefully, and Justin Trudeau won't dispatch the troops.
Hopefully, but with the complicity of the mainstream media, you never know what's going to happen. So thank you. We need more people like you, Ivory.
Thanks so much, Sam. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.
You too, Ivory. Thanks so much for having me.